Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio.
Greetings, boils and ghouls, and welcome to Terror Much Interred Formation, the show that brings you the scary kill stories and slashinating facts and figures from your favorite telekill vision, boovies, murderzik, and more.
God, that voice is exhausting. I can see how that
destroyed the voice actor's voice, yeah.
We're your two grave robbers of genally rotting, your skeletons of scintille, your werewolves of wherewithal. I'm Alex Halloween Gull.
And I am. You wrote several suggestions for me.
Yeah.
I can't take credit for these. Jordan Runtagh, which is very good. Dead Runtagh, also very good. My personal favorite, I think, is Gore-dan, G-O-R-E.
Yeah.
Runtagh.
Yeah.
All just 10 out of 10. Knocked it out of the park.
Oh, thank you so
Extremely
much.
well done.
And as I said before, welcome to 3 weeks of Halloween themed Too Much Information because we didn't get it together for last week. Whoops. Yeah, we should have started this last week, but we're spookily overworked. So we'll be kicking out the seasonally appropriate jams all the rest of the month. Before we get things underway, I would like to give a huge shout out to our supporters on Ko-fi. Still not sure that it's pronounced that way, but whatever. Drop us a message. We will answer. If you have shout outs, they will be taken into consideration.
Honored.
Unless they are weird or I don't know. I have a pretty high tolerance. Jordan probably doesn't. I mean, like sexual stuff.
Have you gotten any of those?
Not yet. Maybe after this one.
Yeah, here we go.
Anyway, thank you to everyone who has donated to that thus far. You know, it means the world. It really does. And now, let us get to the desiccated meat of this week's episode. We are taking a look inside Tales from the Crypt, the 7-season-strong series that terrified HBO subscribers of a certain age from 1989 to 1996. Now, my dad was too cheap to add HBO. So even though I was sort of peripherally aware of the Crypt Keeper, because that dude was everywhere.
Was he like selling like McDonald's stuff at some point?
I have a vague memory of Pizza Hut or like a pizza related
thing.
thing.
Was it.
Yeah,
that was it.
So I only got to watch these whenever they would like pop up at video stores, which wasn't that frequent. And then you would get the censored versions too if you came through Blockbuster because they were Puritans. Did you know that?
That Blockbuster with Puritans?
The Blockbuster was so powerful in the 90s that they would
have their own cuts, right? For different movies.
Yeah, they would have their own cuts. Yeah.
And I think there are some for people who collect VHSs, like my brothers. I think some of those Blockbuster versions are like rare collectibles now, if I'm recalling correctly.
Tremendous.
Censorship turned to commerce.
Yeah, right. The American way. Literally the point of this episode.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, so I only got to watch more of these when I could, torrent them. But I did buy tons of EC Comic trade paperbacks, which is what this show draws from. At any half-price books I could enter with my sweaty little mitts. And because of rights issues, the show continues to only be available through less than optimal means. Jordan, as a frightened child idealizing the 1950s, what was your experience with Tales from the Crypt?
I mean, don't forget how much I loved Are You Afraid of the Dark?
That's true.
So I do have, I have an uncharacteristically high tolerance for spooky stuff.
That's fair.
Like, I just want to say that.
Just not Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, no, just not Guns N' Roses. Much like you, I was aware of this, but I didn't have a ton of exposure to it, mostly because I couldn't figure out how to work the family cable box as a kid. So my HBO viewing was pretty limited. But yeah, I loved this uniquely late 80s, early 90s type of show, which usually kind of sci-fi leaning, that felt like it was being secretly broadcast out of someone's basement, like Wayne's World style.
Sure.
Like, for me, Mystery Science Theater 3000 is a prime example of that for me. And it's not a comment on production quality, but just something about it just seemed so much weirder than anything that was on network TV.
Well,
and I just
Jordan,
always got a kick out of that.
Jordan, it wasn't TV.
It was HBO.
Yeah, I mean, as we'll learn later, the production quality was quite high.
It was very high, yeah. but there was something like throwbacky about.
Oh yeah, for
this. It
sure.
yeah, which I always appreciated. I mean, from seeming like it was descended from the Twilight Zone, which I always loved, to the kind of Borscht Belt style comedy stylings of.
It is so like 1950s Borscht Belt, like Yiddish stand-up stuff. It's so
Yeah.
great.
It's so good. So, I mean, I remember watching this at like friends' houses more than anything else. I remember there was one with like Malcolm McDowell was like
Yep.
he was like a vampire with a conscience who worked at a blood bank.
Watched it the other night. The Reluctant Vampire.
And George Wendt from Cheers like owns the blood bank he works at
Yep.
or something. Yeah, that was a good one. I remember that one. Yeah, I don't know. I just remember thinking like, oh, this is like grown up Are You Afraid of the Dark? Are You Afraid of the Dark is like horror training wheels, but this was like, I remember at the time thinking this was the real deal. I bet you if I watched it now, it would probably be pretty laughable. Does it hold up? I haven't actually watched them.
It's pretty goofy and like, it's clearly meant to be more fun than scary, but there
Yeah.
are some like the very first episode where Larry Drake from LA Law plays a homicidal Santa is pretty out there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember mostly thinking that like the scariest part of the show was the Crypt Keeper.
He's gross.
Yeah.
He's real gross
yeah.
looking. Even
Real
when they
gross.
put him in his little costumes. There was one last night where the cold open had him being like a Walter Cronkite like newscaster. And one that actually made me laugh out loud was a dagger is thrown from off screen and lands in his skull, and he picks it out and goes, "This just in." I was like, "Come on,
It's so good. It's
How do
so
you- how do you-
good.
yeah, how do you not love that?
I'm just so looking forward to this because I know you're going to be in your glory. I mean, you've got comics, you've got horror, you've got probably
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold Schwarzenegger having a good time. You've got what I believe to be the prototypical cigar chomping executive, Joel Silver. I mean, this touches on so many points for you, so I'm really excited.
Well, from the series' tenuous connection to 75-year-old Bible comics, to the historical Senate investigation that got the source material canceled, to the absolutely bonkers roster of Hollywood stars and power brokers seemingly gleefully involved in the series, here's everything you didn't know about Tales from the Crypt. So, as we alluded to at the top of the episode, the history of Tales from the Crypt really begins with EC Comics, which itself begins with a guy named Max Gaines, who's a pretty foundational figure in the history of comic books in America, although he lacks the name recognition of your Stan Lees, or perhaps even your Steve Ditkos, maybe your Chris Claremonts. Nothing.
I knew them in descending order.
According to his son, William Gaines, Max was a piece of shit. He would frequently beat his son with a leather belt and say, "You'll never amount to anything." But regarding his day job, Gaines was working as a salesperson in the year of 1933 at Eastern Color Printing, a company that printed Sunday newspaper comic strips. So Gaines, being a salesman, pitched Procter & Gamble the idea of a tabloid-sized book of color comic strip reprints that would be available for 5 cents and or a label or coupon from any Procter & Gamble product. They initially rejected the idea, but Gaines pushed his vision through at the printing company, and he produced Funnies on Parade, which is an 8-page newsprint magazine reprinting several comic strips licensed from syndicates.
Can we change the name of our show to Trivia on Parade?
Yes. Yeah, that's not bad.
No.
It did retain the Procter & Gamble, though, angle, because it was sent free to customers who mailed in coupons. So his vision was eventually spot on. From an initial run of 10,000 copies, Eastern Color Printing then went on to produce similar periodicals for my beloved Canada Dry and others, but they got up to runs of 250,000 printing this stuff.
Wow. So I'll try to keep my interruptions to a minimum, but this is really
please.
fascinating to me, and I love how much you know about it. So, I mean, comic books were basically born as a freebie coupon cornucopia.
Well, I mean, you always had comic strips, right? Like
Right,
you
like in
had
newspapers
those,
and-
yeah, and so they were just in a way they're what we call trade paperbacks today. Like if you're not a nerd about getting mint condition comics and collecting the individual issues, your average comic reader probably has trade paperbacks, which are all the collected runs bound into a single paperback edition. And that's what these first ones were pitched as. It was just like, hey, we have all of these cartoons from several different syndicates, and individual artists had contracts with different syndicates, and individual papers had different contracts with different syndicates, etc. And I guess fucking Max Gaines was like, I'll put them together. And that, that blew everyone's mind. If one thing good, many things better. And these are madmen.
Dollar signs.
Yeah, exactly. It was 1933. People were dumber.
And poorer.
And poorer. In July of 1934, Gaines then published the compendium Famous Funnies, which ran for 218 issues
These
and is
names.
considered... Oh, yeah, they're terrible. Wackadoo Weekly. The EC ones get worse. Like, I like Two-Fisted Tales.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
That was good.
Famous Funnies is considered the first true American comic book. It's a collection of syndicated comics distributed through Woolworths. He then secured funding from Harry Donenfeld, who is CEO of both National Allied Publication, and this is important, National Allied Publications published Action Comics, which is where Superman debuted, and he was also CEO of the sister company Detective Comics, which you will know is where Batman debuted. And DC Comics since has become the namesake, somewhat redundant name of that brand. And that all came together to form All American Comics in 1938. But by 1945, Gaines thought he saw an end to the comics craze and sold out his share to a guy named Jack Leibowitz. But under Gaines's tenure, All American Comics published characters that are still mainstays of the DC roster, like Wonder Woman, for one, Heard of Her, Green Lantern, and also Hawkman and Hawkwoman.
And Hawk 2.
And also,
I'm sorry. It was right there. It was right there.
Oh, you. Da-na-na-na-na-na. Jordan. They also published the original Flash, and I stopped caring about which Flashes are like. There's so many Flashes.
Yeah. What's the relationship between Flash and Flash Gordon?
Flash Gordon precedes all of this. That was like one of the original action serials.
Right.
Flash Gordon's cool though. I used to have a big collection of those.
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and again, the aforementioned Hawkman and Hawkwoman all kind of date back to the guy who created EC Comics' period at the reins of DC, which is super kind of crazy if you think about it. So then Gaines started educational comics, and he retained only the title Picture Stories from the Bible as its flagship series. So he was bought out of the rest of DC, but kept the one about Bible stories. And yes, horror and gore pioneers EC Comics was initially formed to sell Bible comics. And he wanted to sell other like scientific and little like guides to the kids' guide to
electricity.
Yeah. It's kind of like how TLC used to be the learning channel before it started airing My Gangrenous Armpit and the Obese Man Who Loves It. Is that offensive?
No.
All right.
Unless it's David Zaslav. I mean,
Zaslav is the gangrenous armpit that has sentience of its own.
He owns TLC, right?
Yeah, I think so. Or no, Discovery.
Oh.
Is TLC different? Who gives a shit?
Oh, no, they're owned by Discovery.
So William Gaines dies in a boating accident in 1947 and is in hell, to the immense reassurance of his son Max, who inherited the company and renamed it Entertaining Comics, with the goal of focusing on his preferred genres: science fiction, horror, suspense, and the military.
That's a great pivot from educational comics to entertaining comics. Not a very subtle shift, but an important shift.
Yeah, really mirroring the American discourse as well. It's kind of funny because it did seem like awful timing at the moment, because Universal, where so many of these archetypes and stuff, and the most visible torchbearer for horror movies in the first part of the 20th century, was entering its like most fallow period, like literally dribbling out. They were well into the Abbott and Costello era.
Oh, I love
those. Yeah, they met the Wolfman and Dracula and so forth. The only two originals that Universal produced in the 1950s were The Creature from the Black Lagoon in 1954 and The Mummy in 1955.
Really?
That was it.
That's nuts.
But the two guys that Mr. Gaines hired as editors are two guys named Al Feldstein and Harvey Kurtzman. And they were the people who steered this ship ingeniously. Feldstein encouraged a roster of artists and writers to develop their own voices. Among them, Harlan Ellison. His first published work was through Feldstein. He's the guy who probably came up with the idea for the Terminator in a short story called Demon with a Glass Hand, just a legend of the genre. Kurtzman, meanwhile, focused more on the action side of things and was actually disgusted once the horror stuff started outselling his titles. So what he did was jump ship to Mad Magazine, which was also controlled by EC, and then he left that in 1956 before beginning Little Annie Fanny, a strip which ran in Playboy for the next 26 years, starting from 1962.
Wait, I'm gonna have to get a visual on this.
You really don't. It's what it sounds like.
Oh yeah, it is.
So then when Kurtzman left Mad, Feldstein came over and then spent nearly 30 years overseeing Mad Magazine during its halcyon days. So these two guys, between them, were responsible for not just EC Comics, like the horror EC Comics suspense stuff, everything that flowed from that, which, as I will go on to discuss, is like a huge chunk of culture, but also Mad Magazine, which is like its own enormous world unto itself that was hugely influential. Just like those two dudes were like, we're going to direct American popular culture for the next half a century, and no one will know our names.
Did you used to get Mad Magazine as a kid?
I didn't. I had a bunch of my dad's old copies, so I was
even better.
I was really confused by like who Spiro Agnew was.
That's so funny because I would get the Mad About the 50s, Mad About the 60s, like compendium books. And those were the ones that, because I basically in many ways grew up in the 50s and 60s. So I got all the references. And they were so funny.
Yeah, they're great. I mean, and just such a rich, such a showcase of different art styles and personalities. Like really the proverbial lunatics in charge of the assignment.
And they're edgy, like still today.
Yeah. Are they still publishing today?
No. I meant those like 50s and 60s
ones.
Oh,
the original ones. Yeah, absolutely. But because the comics code hadn't come in, which we will talk about. So with Feldstein and Kurtzman at the helm, EC Comics began its new trend imprint, which aside from the horror stuff was also responsible for weird science and weird fantasy, both of which were hugely important to the science fiction and fantasy genres. Among many of the influential people who they would employ are Frank Frazetta, who is the guy, anytime you look at a sweet 1970s album cover with like a warrior on it, that's probably Frank Frazetta. Most famous one is, I think, 38 Special, but he did covers for Dust. And did he draw the Surf's Up cover?
I don't think so.
Okay.
The Beach Boys album?
Yeah. Strike that from the record. Oh, Molly Hatchet, not 38 Special. Molly Hatchet, Dust, Nazareth, all of them had these amazing... I think he also did the cover of Kiss Alive. Anyway, so Frank Frazetta was under Weird Fantasy, and Ray Bradbury actually came over because, and this is what's kind of funny and shady, is that Bill Gaines would stay up. Apparently Bill Gaines had a weight problem, and he frequently dieted with, like everyone did in those days, with Dexedrine. So he would stay up like all hours of the night just reading other science fiction and then come in the next day and give a loose synopsis of what he had read to his editors, and then they would churn out a comic. And people eventually started noticing that, like Ray Bradbury, who was like, "Hey guys, I see what you're doing," and they were like, "Do you want to come over? What if we give you money?" And so they created some authorized adaptations of some of his stories, including "There Will Come Soft Rains," which is one of the most anthologized Bradbury stories. Wally Wood is another guy who was on the roster. He created Sally Forth, the strip, the daily strip of all things. He also drew the Mars Attacks trading cards for Topps, which later became the basis of the feature film by Tim Burton. And he also is responsible for Daredevil having that distinctive red suit. Wood is also insanely horny. A lot of these guys were so horny. And Wood is also known in comic circles for drawing the Disneyland Memorial Orgy, which was a spread poster for the influential underground magazine The Realist, which is exactly what it sounds like.
Let's get a visual of that. Yeah, yes it is. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know what I expected.
You can Google that one yourself, folks. And then there's just like another dozen or so guys who we can't get into just based on space alone. But these guys were either at EC or at MAD, just like, again, helping shape the latter half of 20th century pop culture. Also, EC was actually fairly brave in publishing stuff that was about drug addiction, that was about racism. One of their most famous stories is published in 1955, was called Master Race, which portrayed a former Nazi death camp commander successfully hiding out in New York before he is spotted by an eerie stranger who chases the Nazi to his death in front of a train. This marked one of the first times that the Holocaust had even been mentioned in popular media. And the whole twist behind it is that like this guy is like alone on a train and he sees someone like staring at him. And gradually throughout the course of the story, through flashbacks, it's revealed that this guy was an SS death camp officer. And that is a wild thing to publish in 1955 in a comic book. Art Spiegelman, who penned Mouse, which is one of the other comics that you're assigned to in your introduction to comic books as an art form class or research period, has hailed it as like one of his favorites. What you looking at, buddy?
I'm still on the Disney Memorial orgy. I'm trying to figure out what the birds are doing to Dumbo.
Does that also count as interracial because the crows were super racist?
Different birds.
Okay.
Does that count as bestiality then if they're interspecies?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're in agreement
That's just fine.
Those are just facts. Al Feldstein maintains that he was the guy who pushed Bill Gaines to produce horror comics, saying the pair bonded over a love of old, spooky radio plays and horror films. From radio serials, Feldstein wanted to have a character that would remain consistent from issue to issue, introducing the discrete stories within, and from there, the character of the Crypt Keeper was born. He was not alone, though. The comic would feature one tale introduced by him, one from the Vault Keeper, and one from the Old Witch. And these three would often take potshots at each other in the letter columns, which I love. Tales from the Crypt debuted in 1950, and in its 5-year run became an enormous hit, with stores frequently complaining that they couldn't keep it in stock. And you have something to say about this.
Yeah, this is where I would make a long-winded speech about the American complacency that was born of the horrors of World War II and how it created a perfect storm for the children of war veterans to want some kind of catharsis as they grew up in a stifling, repressive, conformist society haunted by the specter of their own annihilation by the Cold War. Anyway, just pretend that I did that, and it was very good.
I think you did that in one of the episodes. It might have been Eraserhead.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
The one of the horror, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I'm fascinated by people who are real serious horror heads. I'm fascinated by what they get out of it. It almost seems like a physiological response to it. Well, you're a real horror head. I could ask you.
Yeah, I just think they're neat.
You just think they're cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was a comics person before I was a horror fan. You know, my dad had a big comics collection
didn't know that.
as a kid. Yeah,
And
including
his
a
mom
ton
didn't
of.
throw them away?
She sure did.
Oh, yeah.
She sure did.
All of our dads.
Including like many valuable issues. And also his record collection.
Oh.
So that's why I don't visit grandma. No, just kidding. She's a racist.
Do we think that those issues are valuable because everybody's mom threw them away? And if nobody's mom threw them away, they wouldn't be valuable? Like, is that supply and demand?
Yeah, I mean, obviously comic books is this own, like, you know, I didn't tell people that I was into them. It was still considered like there was a degree of shame baked into them, I think, still when I was in school. Yeah, and only like, I mean, I only saw comic books become the dominant thing and quickly become a disgusting slurry that overwhelmed the rest of American pop culture. That only happened in like the aughts, 2000s moving onward. But yeah, I was into comics. Yeah, I think I got that Flash Gordon thing when I was like, I used to always just read the comics in the paper, and then I got that Flash Gordon thing when I was like maybe 4 or 5, and then just started going into Marvel stuff from there. Horror, I think I got into because my dad showed me the movie Alien when I was like 6. I think I've told this story before, but my 2 introductions to horror were that, which literally gave me nightmares for the next 4 years. And then my down the street neighbor who was super into the movie Halloween. And when we would like play as children, would just dress up as Michael Myers and stalk me through the dusk lit neighborhood. So strong
that's
stuff that
special.
imprinted on me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. However, the Tales from the Crypt comic soon began facing a wave of copycats, and in turn, with the increased attention from not just America's perennially uptight class of moralists with nothing better to do, but also people sharing that mindset who had real teeth, the people in the government.
So since we've been giving this mini history of comic books, you'll now have context at the time from Max Gaines publishing Famous Funnies to when the moral panic over comic books began to set in was not even 6 full years.
That's really crazy. On May 8th, 1940, Sterling North, who would eventually write the children's Newbery Honor book Rascal, wrote in the Chicago Daily News that, quote, color comic magazines were a, quote, national disgrace, and that parents and teachers throughout America must band together to break the comic magazine.
We will break it. Okay, man.
The word color, whenever it's used by like a morally
Someone
righteous,
in that
in that era, I always get uncomfortable. I don't like that. Fortunately, World War II nipped North's campaign in the bud, and after the war was over, the fact that fortunately 20 million people died so that comics could live.
Kind of a wash.
Yeah. And after the war was over, the fact that comics as a medium focused so heavily on stories of bravery, with various wings of the armed forces and a flag waving in the background and a
G.I. Joe
standing on the throat of Goebbels or something. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're getting dangerously close to Howard Dean.
Yeah.
That helped keep negative Nancy's like North away. But as the tide turned towards horror and crime, across all pop culture, it must be said, comic books caught the attention of no less than J. Edgar Hoover, who hilariously on April 20th, 420, 1947, published an editorial in This Week claiming, in part, that, quote, crime books, comics, and newspaper stories crammed with antisocial and criminal acts, the glorification of un-American vigilante action, and the deification of the criminal are extremely dangerous in the hands of the, not just any child, the unstable child.
Yeah, this is where it gets really gross, is that they were like, basically the whole moral panic was like, oh, if kids are already bad kids and they read comics, they'll become worse. And so, but like, there's like a degree of socioeconomic and racial dimension to who were bad kids or predisposed to be bad kids.
Antisocial is such a funny word too. Antisocial acts.
Yeah. Hoover's article, though, kind of just paved the way for the real enemy of the comic books, Frederick Wertham. In March of 1938, Wertham, who was already somewhat famous for his testimony during the trial of notorious child killer and cannibal Albert Fish, gave a symposium on the, quote, psychopathology of comic books. This event was covered in Collier's Weekly in late March, and Wertham himself penned an article about comic books in the Saturday Review of Literature in May of 1948. And that's all it took, because people had less to do in the 40s and less things to read. So by fall, the Associated Press was already reporting on a rash of comic book burnings that were happening in largely Catholic parishes across the country.
Burnings are never good. Burning,
Yeah,
no.
just don't burn stuff.
Yeah.
Among Wertham's pet theories were that Batman and Robin were gay, Wonder Woman was a lesbian sadist, and that ads for binoculars in the back of comic books promoted children spying on their neighbors.
You think he would have been into the spying on neighbors?
I was going to say, this was the Red Scare. Like
Yeah.
that's what we were encouraging children to do. So then a quickly ad hoc assembled group of comic book publishers responded by publishing their own publisher's code that year. And they drew on the Hollywood Production Code, which is better known as the Hays Code, which itself had been explicitly designed to get the damn government off Hollywood's back for all that sweet, sweet sex and violence it had been portraying. The Publisher's Code followed some of the language of the Hays Code, and it forbade portrayals of crime that might throw sympathy against the law or weaken respect for established authority. Nicely, it prohibited ridicule or attack on any religious or racial group, and sexy wanton comics were banned. And my favorite one, divorce was forbidden from being, the act of divorce was prohibited from being treated, quote, humorously or represented as glamorous or alluring. Comics that complied with this were offered a seal of approval. This failed to keep the Werthams and Hoovers of the world satisfied, and by 1954, Wertham had published his most famous work, creepily titled Seduction of the Innocent.
Oh.
Whatever editor let that through, you failed. Which argued that comic books contributed to delinquent behavior in youths. Now, worth noting here that in 2010, a University of Illinois librarian and PhD student discredited much of Wortham's research as fabricated or misleading. In particular, he was identifying children who were already being treated for psychological issues and using them as the benchmark.
Whoa. Oh, wow. That's really...
Talk about cooking the books.
Yeah.
Wortham was also nothing if not a greedy publicity hound, and had spent much of the years between that first symposium and the publication of his book beating the drum for this particular cause. So by the time the book was published, he'd primed the American public, and in particular the American legislature, to jump on board. So in 1953, the United States Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency had been established and would hold its first hearings in April of 1954. EC Comics were particularly hammered throughout the course of these hearings, chaired by Estes Kefauver. As a 50s name if ever I've heard one. He was supposed to be quite a liberal, actually. I was disappointed to learn that he was responsible for this while having a somewhat admirable voting record otherwise. But the hearings became a landmark for repression and censorship in the U.S. One exchange in particular has become very famous. Senator Kefauver was grilling EC Comics publisher Bill Gaines, and he asked him, "Here is your May issue. This seems to be a man with a bloody axe holding a woman's head up, which has been severed from her body. Do you think that's in good taste?" And Gaines answered, "Yes, sir, I do, for the cover of a horror comic." That's the quip, but the full quote, he continued, is so much better. "A cover in bad taste, for example, might be defined as holding her head a little higher so that blood could be seen dripping from it, and moving the body a little further over so that the neck of the body could be seen to be bloody." And it's funny about that cover in particular, it had already been edited. The original draft of it was what Gaines was describing, a much more graphic version, and they walked it back. Gaines would later admit that he was not at his best during these hearings. He was a frequent, as I mentioned earlier, he was a frequent user of Dexedrine, and just, I guess, was on the stand a lot when he was crashing from his speed binges. But Wortham has the record for the best soundbite during these hearings. Quote, "I think Hitler was a beginner compared to the comic book industry." Pause for commercial break. That's fucking insane for a German man to say that.
Also, I mean, just of all the words he could have used to kind of make the same point, a beginner.
Yeah. What a weird guy he was. I'm trying to think if there's anything else anything else that escaped his bull.
Did like a comic book artist kick sand in his face on the beach or something? Like what is this?
No, he was quite well regarded. I mean, he corresponded, visited with Freud. He actually opened a clinic that specialized in the treatment of black teenagers, financed by voluntary contributions. But man, he hated comic books.
That's the thing I never really understood. The bad reputation that comic books seemed to have when we were kids that I never got, because I was just like, well, they're reading. It's not television. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, that was, I guess, early 90s and stuff when most people were just watching TV. But yeah, I never really understood the whole, like, they rot your brain kind of propaganda that was put around.
Yeah, it's quite funny. The other thing that Wortham was the court psychiatrist for another famous case, the Brooklyn Thrill Killers, who were a group of Jewish teenagers, hilariously enough, who were just roaming around beating the shit out of people. Just saying.
I was looking up Albert Fish earlier. You talked about how he testified at the Albert Fish trial. I was going to give a quick thumbnail sketch of his crimes.
Oh,
and it was
don't.
too
Don't do
much.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't do that.
No.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thrust of that trial was the fact that, like, Wortham was like, he is insane. This man is actually truly deeply insane. That is my conclusion. And then the whole thing was like, well, we all agree he's insane, but
what do we do now?
We should probably kill him, though, right? Like, and everyone was just like, yeah, no, that actually makes a lot. Yeah, let's just kill him. And everyone was in agreement because of the horror that this man inflicted.
Yeah. I don't spook easily with that kind of stuff. Well, let me put it this way, folks. There's after you're done Googling the Disney Memorial Orgy, There
Mhm.
is a letter that Albert Fish wrote to
Oh
the
God,
mother.
don't send that to people.
Oh,
No, dude.
okay.
Don't.
you, you look genuinely unhappy with me right now.
It's gross, man.
Well, yeah,
It's
yes,
really,
yes,
yeah.
yes, it is.
How
Yes,
about
it
this?
is.
How about this? I'll lead you. I'll. My preferred Albert Fish nugget is that
Okay.
he had allegedly he was into self mortification, and he had allegedly inserted so many sewing needles into his bathing suit parts that the electric chair supposedly shorted out the first time they tried to give it to him.
Maybe that was his grand plan. Maybe that was the goal. Maybe he's playing 3D chess. We're playing checkers.
Hashtag fish tricks. He's just
He would've been
always on his always
huge
always
on
on his
TikTok.
grind. Oh my God, yeah. Oh,
How much of
Jesus
this will I
Christ.
keep?
oh, buddy. As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
The Estes Kefauver hearings, remember that? Who could forget a name like Estes Kefauver? He was Adlai Stevens' running mate.
Yes.
These hearings established the Comics Code of Authority, which essentially was just a more stringent and powerful version of the previous code. Although it was technically voluntary, comics not receiving the CCA stamp of approval were essentially doomed on the newsstand, and thus was the fate of EC Comics. Wortham, for his part, remained unsatisfied by having stamped out EC Comics, and a year later returned to the Saturday Review of Literature to publish an article called
It's hilarious.
It's Still Murder, in which he complained about all caps lettering and the phrasing of word balloons. What's wrong with all caps?
I believe both of those were like things that he identified that like either hastened or contributed to ill psychiatry in children. He was like, it was like the phraseology of word balloons where there was like short internal dialogue. He was like, it was still murder to him.
Did he live to see Batman with like pow, wow, like the TV, the Adam
Oh,
West
that's
show?
a great question.
Oh, let's look this up because that would have like caused his brain to explode.
It's actually quite sad because he did he was like very pro like I said, protective of children. And just like helping kids. But then later his last book was published in 1974.
Oh, so he lived through Batman.
He did live through Batman. And he wrote a book on fanzines. He said they were constructive and a healthy exercise of creative drives. This is crazy. He was invited to address the New York Comic Art Convention. And they got there and people heckled the shit out of him. And of course, he stopped writing. The reception was so bad, he stopped publishing things about comic books. It's just like he must have been like that Peep Show thing. Like, are we the baddies? Like he just did not realize that everyone hated him for doing this.
Well, he lived in 1981, so he saw like Fritz the Cat and all that kind of stuff.
Well, so one of his big things was like eye injuries. Like he repeatedly cited like damage to the eyes as one of these huge sins that comics admitted. So people were then playing it up in comics. Like later, people would have like there's a Bongo Comics published a story called Stab, which is about eye injuries. A funny guy.
Bill Gaines, meanwhile, attempted to launch a new clean line at EC. Okay, just want a quick recap. EC Bible comics, horrors, and then trying to scale back the horrors now with a new line called New Direction. These names,
It
does what it says on the tin. But pretty much anything with the EC name on it was getting returned from distributors unopened because of its reputation. The company closed its horror and crime titles with an editorial statement at the end, reading in part, "Economically, our situation is acute. Magazines that do not get on the newsstands do not sell. We are forced to capitulate. We give up." That's sad. Bill Gaines' empire was whittled down to Mad Magazine, which, though it would become a huge success, is not the point of this episode.
So, EC's horror roster went underground, but the impact that it had on generations of creatives still can't be measured. So by 1971, there was a low-budget UK film company named Amicus Productions, and they approached Bill Gaines about a feature-length adaptation. So this was 1972's Tales from the Crypt. It was directed by Freddie Francis, who had previously won an Oscar for cinematography for 1960's D.H. Lawrence adaptation, Sons and Lovers. Gross. Following the same anthology format, the film collected several stories and shot them all on a shoestring budget over the course of about a month, notably starring Joan Collins and Hammer horror icon Peter Cushing. Unsurprisingly, it was not good. And also unsurprisingly, it got a sequel the year after. Jordan, you'll appreciate this. The sequel was called Vault of Horror, and it was directed by a guy named Roy Ward Baker, previously best known for A Night to Remember, a 1958 documentary adaptation of a book about the sinking of the Titanic.
One of my favorites.
I don't think I got a Beatles one in here yet, so
I'll find one.
I bet you will. Meanwhile, a collective nostalgia was growing in the hearts and minds of the boomers who had grown up on EC Comics, and they were now rapidly rising to the seats of power in the country. First example of this is the wonderful cult film Creepshow. And it is one of my favorites. It's so adorable and so funny and so good. And it's a perfect example of how much people were willing to go to the mat for this stuff because they just loved it so much. And it was directed, Stephen King hit up George Romero about this. So like Stephen King, not quite, he would have been at like the height of his, not height.
This is post Shining, yeah.
Oh yeah. So Stephen King at the height of his powers hit up George Romero and was like, we got to do something about EC Comics. It was an EC Comics adaptation in everything but name. This was actually Stephen King's Hollywood debut as a screenwriter, and he acts in the opening segment in a just wonderful performance that really gives no doubt that the man was composed primarily of cocaine and alcohol at that time.
I was going to say a sterling monument to his drug abuse.
But it is so good. Creepshow is so good. It has Hal Holbrook, Adrienne Barbeau, Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson, Ed Harris, and naturally, because it was directed by George Romero, it was shot in and around Pittsburgh. Because as John Carpenter famously put it, someone's got to do it. Special effects artist Wiz Tom Savini handled the effects and enlisted something like 20,000 cockroaches for one indelible segment. The film is lovingly styled after the EC Comics look. Individual segments end in freeze frames that they transition into illustrated comic splash panels. Has all these garish lighting and Dutch angles. It's so good. And crucially, because it was written by King, it was able to avoid traipsing on any EC trademarks. The film earned $21 million on an estimated $8 million budget, and was followed by an oddly named TV adaptation, Tales from the Dark Side. Hashtag rights issues. And then the Creepshow 2 came out in 1987. And there are Tales from the Dark Side movies, I also want to say. And once again, I just have to stress how good Creepshow is, everyone. You should just go see it or rent it. It's hilarious. And it paved the way for the absolute insane roster of Hollywood movers and shakers that we are about to drop on you, who pooled their own resources for their own proper adaptation, which means we have finally gotten to the point of this episode.
For a keen-eyed student of Hollywood, the opening credits of the HBO Tales from the Crypt series are a gold mine. We'll get to the cavalcade of prominent guest stars that the series enlisted shortly, but the executive producers listed at the top of every episode are Walter Hill, David Giler, Richard Donner, Joel Silver, and Robert Zemeckis. Now go ahead and hit the rewind button on your podcast platform to take that all in again. Heigl, give us a rundown on this murderers row. Tell us who they are.
You got Walter Hill, director of The Warriors, 48 Hours, Streets of Fire, which is its own cult hit, not as cool as the other two, but that's fine. You've got his business partner and other producer, David Giler, who produced and co-wrote Aliens, also Myra Breckinridge.
Oh my God, the adaptation of the Gore Vidal book that was probably not a very delicate handling of transgender
Sure
people.
wasn't.
Nope.
And also, Undisputed. David Giler produced Undisputed, the 2002 prison fight flop that starred Wesley Snipes, Ving Rhames, Peter Falk, and beloved character actors Michael Rooker and Wes Studi, and also Master P. I don't know why I went so long on that. I just think it's very funny that guy, his like career was sort of, I mean, he's still working. He's still alive. But anyway, you've got Richard Donner of The Omen, Superman, The Goonies, Scrooged, Lethal Weapon. And then last but certainly not least, you've got Joel Silver, baby, producer extraordinaire. He did all that with Walter Hill. He also did Commando, the entirety of the Lethal Weapon franchise. He did the first 2 Die Hards, the first 2 Predators, and the Matrixes. That's Joel Silver, baby. He's also like kind of a head, right? Like he's got like a pretty bad reputation, right?
Yeah, he's got a cameo in
Roger Rabbit.
Rabbit, yeah.
Well, I was getting to Roger Rabbit.
Oh, sorry.
You've got Robert Zemeckis, director of Romancing the Stone, Back to the Future trilogy, 2 of which are good, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which whips, Death Becomes Her, and then a bunch of other stuff that sucks, like Forrest Gump and The Polar Express.
Oh, he did Castaway, right? Where do we land on Castaway?
Oh, yeah, sure. Castaway's fine.
Yeah. Side note about Dick Donner. I know we told this story in the Goonies episode about how all the kids in the Goonies tormented him, and then he flew home to Hawaii at the end of the shoot to unwind, only to discover that producer Steven Spielberg had flown the entire cast down to Dick Donner's house for a party to surprise him there when he arrived home, which is a hilarious prank and something that only Steven Spielberg could do. I didn't realize that Dick Donner's feud with kids dated back to when he directed The Omen, and he asked the kid auditioning to play Damien to fight him. And so the kid, quote, kicked him square in the balls and then began scratching at his face so hard that his parents had to pry him off. And Dick Donner...
Kid really wanted that part.
Yeah, he gave it to him because he liked the kid's spunk.
Awful.
Anyway, Walter Hill was directing at Universal in the early 80s when he got lost in Russ Cochrane's hardcover reprints of the EC Comics line and became a young boy again, metaphorically speaking. He called in his partner David Giler, who similarly got caught up in the rush of nostalgia, and the same collection caught the eye of Joel Silver when all 3 men were working on Lethal Weapon in 1983. The 3 of them optioned the rights from Bill Gaines, who was suitably very intimidated by several of the most important men in Hollywood approaching him, for, quote, very little, as Silver recalls, in the wonderful tome Tales from the Crypt, the Official Archives by Digby Deal. That's a hell of a name.
Digby did some real Lord's work. He's also like a co-biographer of many famous people. Like that's what he was mostly known for. And then also this awesome, it's kind of like the Big Trouble in China book. That's like, it's like $400 on eBay and stuff.
I've been trying to track that down for you.
Oh, I got it. My in-laws got it for me for my birthday.
God.
Yeah. Shouts to Charlie and Pat. But yeah, Digby Deal did, celebrity autobiographies with like Natalie Cole, Patti LuPone. He also did a CIA memoir.
What?
A memoir by the J. Paul Getty's 5th wife. So, and just also made time to pen the definitive book on Tales from the Crypt.
A hero. Digby Deal, we bestow upon you the honorary title, Friend of the Pod.
You are dead and not in hell.
Oh, he's dead?
He's super dead.
No, he can still be friend of the pod, though.
Yeah.
Also, while working on Lethal Weapon, Dick Donner was pulled in one night after shooting in their trailer when Silver simply said, "Hey, I'm working on a Tales from the Crypt series." And apparently that's all it took. Donner later said, "I have no idea what our concept was going to be or how it would evolve, and there were times when everyone near and dear to my life said, 'Don't put any more of your money into this project.' But I stuck with it." Robert Zemeckis, meanwhile, was swayed through a different Bill Gaines product, Mad Magazine. He recalled his Back to the Future co-writer Bill Gale introducing him to EC Comics while the pair were roommates at USC. Gale was a comics nerd who had fan letters published in Marvel's Tales of Suspense and Iron Man in 1968 and would later write for the company. While filming Who Framed Roger Rabbit, in which Joel Silver has a great cameo as a hot-headed director. "Baby Herman, you were great. You were perfect. You were better than perfect. It's just Roger. He keeps blowing his lines. What's that? Tweety Bird. Tweety Bird. What's the script say? Stars. Not Tweety Bird, stars." God, it's so good. It's so good. I gotta rewatch that soon.
Oh yeah.
Where the hell am I? While filming Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Zemeckis explained, Joel mentioned that he was working on getting EC Comics on cable. I knew Tales from the Crypt would never succeed on network television. They'd ruin it. If it was going on cable, I told him I was interested. One of the problems was that there was a huge pale on retro anthology stuff after the disaster of the Twilight Zone movie. Heigl, what happened during the Twilight Zone movie shoot?
John Landis killed some kids, and also Vic Morrow.
Oh.
And John Landis told the helicopter pilot to drive closer to the explosions.
Jesus.
And they all died in fiery, screaming agony. And then John Landis maintained that he did nothing wrong for years.
Did the helicopter pilot live?
I want to say yes.
Ooh.
No, actually.
Oh. Actually, I don't know the right answer for that. Both are
3
bad.
actors. No, it was just the kids and Vic Morrow.
Jesus.
Yeah. Steven Spielberg cut him off because of that.
Really?
Yeah.
That's what it took?
Yeah.
Wow. Silver told the LA Times, it was an unusual time because there had been a bunch of anthology shows and films that had all just gone in the toilet.
Jesus Christ. Sorry. During a take 3 hours before the incident, the helicopter pilot who was in Vietnam
Oh, yeah.
told Landis that the fireballs were too large and too close to the helicopter, to which Landis responded, "You ain't seen nothing yet." Witnesses testified that Landis was still shouting for the helicopter to fly lower, lower, moments before it crashed. Also, he was also violating labor laws by having these kids work past their hours.
I was going to say, weren't they like not even actors? Didn't he just like find them or something? Like,
He was, even the district attorney was like, this guy's being gross. Like, during the trial, I mean.
did he ever like recover from that? How did he not get like Alec Baldwin?
Different time. Well, he made the Thriller video.
It was an unusual time, Joel Silver told the LA Times, because there had been a bunch of anthology shows and films that had all just gone into the toilet in the aftermath of the Twilight Zone movie incident. He was craftily pitching it, too. He promised the creative freedom of non-network TV and a relatively large budget, which he subsidized by selling the rights to the series to foreign markets, packaging 3 at a time as feature-length films. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, smart guy. You know, what can I say? Knows his way around the business.
Walter Hill recalled the project stalling out for several years until getting a phone call from Silver for what Deal calls a, quote, classic micro-conversation with Silver. This amounted to Joel Silver, basically in one breath, telling Hill that Zemeckis and Donner were on board, as was HBO, and could Hill film something in 5 days. Joel Silver would end up making his directorial debut on the series with the episode Split Personality, which involves a typically Tales-esque murderer's row of talent. It stars Joe Pesci. The script is written by Monster Squad and Night of the Creep scribe Fred Decker. Jurassic Park's David Lowery was a storyboard artist, and Speed and Twister director Jan de Bont was the cinematographer. To this day, it is literally the only thing that Joel Silver has ever directed.
Why bother when you knock it out of the park in your first at bat?
True.
Because of this assemblage of power players, plus the nostalgia factor, TFTC, as I've grown to call it in our friendship, was able to recruit a seriously mind-boggling array of guests during its run, including many Oscar winners. The full list is like 3 columns long on Wikipedia, so I'm not naming everyone, but it'll feel like I am because of how many people were involved in this show. You had your A-listers like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who directed an episode and was paid $15,000. Everyone worked for scale on this. That's what's so crazy about it. So Arnold Schwarzenegger took over the director's chair for an episode and was paid $15,000 while also cashing a check for $10 million for Total Recall. Tom Hanks, who also directed, Kirk Douglas, Christopher Reeve, Martin Sheen, Patricia Arquette, Brooke Shields, Bill Paxton, Steve Buscemi. Then you had basically anyone who was hot in the mid-'80s to early 90s, and I do mean physically as well as with your juice, if you will. Why did I say that like that? Demi Moore, Anthony Michael Hall, Judd Nelson, Corey Feldman, Michael J. Fox, who also directed, Kyle MacLachlan, and most of the cast of Twin Peaks, Lou Diamond Phillip, Kelly Preston, Ki Hoi Kwan, Leah Thompson, and John Stamos. You have comedians from they include Dan Aykroyd, Don Rickles. Rickles' episode is great. He plays a ventriloquist. It's great. Comedians included, Dan Aykroyd, Don Rickles, John Lovitz, Cheech Marin, Hank Azaria, Catherine O'Hara, Whoopi Goldberg, Katie Seagal, Ted Danson, and Rita Rudner. There were also a bunch of people from the music world who came over. Iggy Pop, Isaac Hayes, Meat Loaf, Roger Daltrey of The Who, Slash of Guns N' Roses and also just being Slash, Tim Curry, Priscilla Presley, and also Wayne Newton.
I just love it. You said Meatloaf as if Loaf was his last name. Meatloaf?
Mr. Loaf? Please, that was my father. Call me Meat.
Was the scene from, was it The Apprentice?
It's The
When
Apprentice,
Meatloaf
yeah.
is
When
having-
people are trying, he's like having a meltdown, and like people are trying to soothe him. Like I think it's
Mark
Sugar.
McGrath.
It's, Mark McGrath of Sugar Ray is like meat. Some of the across the pond talent who came over were Malcolm McDowell, Isabella Rossellini, Bob Hoskins, who directed an episode, Timothy Dalton, the Bond guy for two things of Bond, boxing legend Sugar Ray Leonard. And the show also gave early gigs to a bunch of people who would go on to become A-listers, like Ewan McGregor, Benicio del Toro, Daniel Craig, Jonathan Banks of Breaking Bad, the tall guy from Everybody Loves Raymond.
Ooh, he scares me.
I told you about one of my favorite Jiminy Glick put downs is from him. Jiminy says something to him, and Brad Garrett's like, "Oh, I'm sure you got that from the website, didn't you?" And like a millisecond later, sweet Martin just comes out with, "Oh, because there's so many books written about you."
As much as I hate Martin Short, I do love Jiminy Glick.
Yeah. Jada Pinkett, I think it's just Jada Pinkett these days. She was in there. Jeffrey Tambor in a fat suit that looks suspiciously exactly like the fat suit and makeup they put Colin Farrell in to play the Penguin in his current job. Like Jeffrey, Google it. It's weird. Jeffrey Tambor's fat suit in makeup in Nights from the Crypt looks eerily, almost exactly similar to the Penguin right now. Obvious genre mainstays like Brad Dourif, Michael Ironside, Lance Henriksen, Arlie Ermy shows up at one point to do his whole thing. And also, saving the handsomest for last, Brad Pitt. Tom Holland, who directed Child's Play and Fright Night, was the director of the episode that Brad Pitt stars in with music by Warren Zevon, which is super cool. And he told Sci-Fi that after Brad Pitt appeared in that episode, he said, "I thought Brad Pitt was so terrific in that. I went out and tried to get him an agent, and I couldn't get him an agent." In the episode, he said, he smiled. It's all he had to do. And when he smiled, I said, "Well, that's a movie star." And I said, "Light him as well as the girl." I mean, he was as beautiful as she was.
I love how much you love Brad Pitt.
I love Tom Holland, too. He's so damn funny. When Julia Walters died, I interviewed him about how she was almost the voice of Chucky. And he was so cool on the phone. Yeah, he said it was just like it ended up being like a little too effeminate, and then like obviously, but she had been in Play Misty for me, so he thought she could convincingly pull off a psychopath. But I think the problem was that in the test screenings, people were like, "Well, Chucky sounds gay," so they were like, "Okay, get a man to do it." And those are just all the people with name recognition in this. There are so many damn character actors in this show where you just go, "That guy." Like, it's incredible. You would die doing a drinking game if you were just like, take a shot every time you recognize someone.
How long was it on? 7 years? I mean, there aren't even like that many episodes of this too. It's pretty amazing how stacked this cast is.
Just wild. Yeah.
The director's list is a who's who as well. You mentioned Tom Holland, who did Child's Play, Psycho 2, and Fright Night. American Psycho and Pet Sematary director Mary Lambert. Texas Chainsaw Massacre director Toby Hooper. And also, hopefully, Poltergeist, right? Even though there's some debate about that.
Sorry, I should have put that in. He also directed Poltergeist.
Even though a lot of people think Steven Spielberg did. Spielberg put an ad in the trades that said he did not.
We've also covered that story,
Yes. Yeah, many times.
But it's kind of sad.
Exorcist director and French Connection director William Friedkin. That horror show of a man.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
He came on and worked for Scale. I guess he really
Damn.
loved EC Comics, man.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that everybody worked for Scale just shows the affection that so many of these people had for this beloved bit of nostalgia from their childhood.
Or in the more cynical reading, they were cozying up to this crazy assemblage of hot producers and directors. Like, sure, I'll come by and do your thing for peanuts.
Good point. Very good point. The budget for each episode was around $900,000, which sounds high to me, especially for today. I bet you that's like close to $2.5 million.
It is high for an episode of TV show.
Yeah. And as you said, people just loved making these. Arnold Schwarzenegger told the LA Times in 1990 that, quote, it was, I would say, can you do that? I can't do the voice.
It was, I would say, the greatest joy I've had in the whole movie business.
Arnold Schwarzenegger expressing joy is the same
It doesn't
timbre
work,
of him
yeah.
expressing sorrow.
It's because his laughter is so alienating.
I was gonna say I can't picture his laugh, but
It was, I would say, the greatest joy I've had. It doesn't work, man. Like, I'm sorry. Imagine being like around him when he expresses genuine mirth. You'd be like, what the Jesus. Thus spake Zarathustra starts playing in the background.
What a truly horrifying image we've created for our listeners.
You're
There.
welcome. This is why you people pay the Ko-fi big bucks.
Wait, could do the laugh and I'll splice in the sounds.
That was a funny joke. Then the video.
Joel Silver recalled in a behind-the-scenes featurette that Martin Scorsese actually expressed interest in doing an episode at one point, and he had a specific comic in mind to do, but I guess it never came together.
No, and he said he came up. He said the next time he saw Marty, like years later at an award show or whatever, Scorsese came up to him and was like, "Man, I really wish I'd gotten to do that Night of the Tales from the Crypt episode." Just like people fucking loved it, man. It had such a spirit of joy behind it.
Aww. For Robert Zemeckis, Dick Donner, and the rest of the show's high-profile producers, Tales from the Crypt's financial payoff was always thought to be a move to syndication, which paid off when Tales from the Crypt was bought by Fox for a late-night Saturday slot in 1994, which I vaguely remember. But obviously all the sex and gore wouldn't fly, because this was made for HBO after all, so the episodes were re-edited to include alternate takes that eliminated most of the original episode's gore and nudity. The show also had actors record PG-rated versions of otherwise profane dialogue during shooting. And even though this meant extra work, it also meant extra money for all concerned.
Yeah, it's just funny that they were like, take good blood-curdling scream, thank you, let's clean up all this blood, and we'll do a PG one next. Everyone back to one. Donner's vision from the jump was that the show had to look just like the comics. His first episode, Dig That Cat, whatever, it was shot entirely with extreme wide-angle lenses, he told Digby Deal, deliberately distorting people. He also said that he told a young editor when he got his first edits back from this kid, I want you to go back into the editing room and do everything you were trained not to do. The show picked up some of the industry's most talented miniatures and effects artists. Chris Walas directed an episode. He's known for The Fly and other disgusting things. The opening credits are really incredible. That is a mini mansion. It's actually a full, like a miniature which is designed by Richard Edlund, who is a guy who came up through Industrial Light and Magic, which again is just proof that like Hollywood is like a dozen people who all know each other and make everything happen, particularly in this era. But Donner and Zemeckis took charge of this sequence and actually piloted, like, I guess it was like an endoscopy camera, like a tiny little camera on the end of a tube that they were just kind of running from above through the rooms of this little miniature mansion and down the staircase. And they disguise the cut when the door opens, and then they're in the actual set for the Crypt Keeper. Speaking of that, the artist responsible for designing the crypt was Mike Vosberg. He's the guy who does all the comic illustrations, also at the top of the episode. The main FX artist associated with Tales from the Crypt, TFTC, was a guy named Todd Masters. And boy, did he go buck wild freed from the constraints of regular TV. It did eventually, though, find a line that he couldn't cross, and I will detail that to you now. It was for an episode starring Steve Buscemi, which involved his character suffering and then dying from something called jungle rot. Masters told Digby Deal that he could have done the shot with a model, but actually devised a way to make it look like Steve Buscemi's face was melting off in real time and disgustingly falling apart. And it looked so realistic that Richard Donner was sent the dailies, and the morning after he called them and said, that was too much. But Masters said told Digby Deal that was the only time he was ever told to rein it in. This thing picked up a bunch of Emmy nominations that it didn't win, mostly for technical stuff, but also for wardrobe. So shout out to Warden Neal, who's the wardrobe designer for that. Kirk Douglas was nominated for his guest role. I don't know what the Cable Ace Awards are, but TFTC won 10, so that's cool. Danny Elfman does the theme. I bet you can guess what it sounds like. Thumping John Sousa-esque rhythms, a melodic line that falls squarely on the beat and uses the flattened fifth and sixth from the major scale. But other musicians popped up to help with TFTC, including, as previously mentioned, my beloved Warren Zevon, jazz bass legend Stanley Clarke, Mahavishnu Orchestra keyboardist and Miami Vice theme composer Jan Hammer, guitarist and musical man about town Ry Cooder, Titanic and many other things composer James Horner, and Bruce Broughton, who is most notable for composing for like a ton of stuff that was never huge, but then he was embroiled in an Oscars controversy where, while as an executive committee member of the Academy's music branch, they discovered that he was calling other members and stumping for himself for his own nomination. As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
Well, folks, let's be honest. You people are here for the Crypt Keeper, the Borscht Belt style host whose puns and disgusting appearance and his little costumes, as you mentioned, kept us all coming back. He's descended from the rich tradition of horror hosts that I think we may have covered in another episode. People like Vampira and Zachary, who'd essentially MC in regional markets when their local affiliates aired old schlock late at night. So the idea of having this host was a must from the get-go. What's wild is how Chuck Yeager, not the guy who broke the sound barrier for the first time, the guy who designed Chucky from Child's Play, actually wound up for the job. Joel Silver bumped into him in a storage facility where they both had lockers, happened to see Yeager's collection of props and so forth, and offered him the job on the spot. Now, to me, that's such a like only in Hollywood kind of thing, and I really enjoyed that. And that kind of sent me down a little rabbit hole earlier tonight about weird ways that other people in Hollywood got discovered, and I found some good ones. May I go off on the sidebar for a minute and share some with you?
You may, but careful, prosecutor.
Counselor? Charlize Theron was discovered while in the middle of an argument at a bank. She later told Oprah, "I really needed the money. I began pleading with this teller to help me, and a gentleman came over and tried to help. What I didn't know was that I was auditioning for a guy who would end up being my manager. On the way out, the man who helped me gave me his card."
That could have just been horniness, though.
Yeah. Kate Moss was having a fight with her dad at an airport when she was spotted by a talent agent. She was 14 years old.
Jesus Christ.
They boarded the plane, and according to the talent agent that signed her, as soon as the seatbelt switched off, they went over to her. Kate would later say, "I was smoking, I was 14, and I just lost my virginity. So I thought I was the bee's knees. I was in the airport puffing away. I got on the plane, and then the CEO of the model company and her brother came up to me and said, 'Have you ever thought about being a model?'" Pamela Anderson was at a football game, and they projected her image up on the Jumbotron, and she happened to be wearing a Labatt's Beer t-shirt, and the image of her in that t-shirt got back to Labatt's Beer themselves, who suggested she model for them.
No.
So that's how that started. Everyone knows about how Harrison Ford was a carpenter around Hollywood, and he was a carpenter for a very famous casting director, Fred Roos, who kept suggesting him for different parts. Harrison kept getting turned down until eventually he was cast in his breakout role in George Lucas's American Graffiti in 1973.
I can't believe people turned down Harrison Ford.
I
Like, did you
know.
see him? Did you look at his face and hear his voice?
I could see people thinking that he couldn't act early on. You know what I mean? Maybe. I don't know. He's so like stoic in a bad way. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess.
Anya Taylor-Joy was walking her dog when she was scouted by the founder of a top modeling agency. According to an interview she gave with James Corden, she said, "My actions were very stupid, and I don't suggest that anybody do what I did. A car was following me, and I started running, and this guy leans out the window and says, 'If you stop, you won't regret it.' And I stopped."
Wow. Okay.
Toni Braxton was singing to herself at a gas station when songwriter Bill Petaway overheard her and helped her get a deal with Arista Records. John Wayne had a job moving props and filming equipment at Fox Film Corporation when the filmmakers, notably John Ford, started casting him as an extra instead. And here's my favorite. I didn't realize this. As much Marilyn Monroe lore as I know, she was 19 years old and working in an aircraft factory when a touring army photographer took her picture. The photographer liked what he saw when he developed the photo and came back to use her as basically a recurring model. And after a while, she got so many modeling gigs through him that she quit her factory job, divorced her husband, dyed her hair blonde, and changed her name. She was still Norma Jean Baker.
Well, good.
Yeah, I think that's all I got.
Maybe though, men in cars and airports should stop approaching underage women.
Yeah, that's a good takeaway. So Chuck Yeager and Joel Silver went through the typically torturous process of sketching and casting the Crypt Keeper from clay and basically just hacking away at it, taking different parts of the face away, the hair, the lips, the teeth. Though crucially, he did originally have a nose, and it was Robert Zemeckis, dear sweet Robert Zemeckis, who gave us the Polar Express and Forrest Gump and Back to the Future, the movie about the mom trying to date her son, who suggested that they take the nose away, which is kind of the most horrifying part of the Crypt Keeper.
It really is bad.
It really is. It's real bad. It's real bad, yeah. Yeager did add one signature touch, however. The Crypt Keeper literally has Chucky from Child's Play's eyes, or at least the same model of false eyes that was used in Child's Play. The other producers, Walter Hill and David Giler, were prepared for a more human-looking host, and kind of understandably initially balked when they gazed upon the horrifying visage of the Crypt Keeper.
Somehow desiccated and moist at the same time. Exist in a state of superimposition between two states like Schrodinger's cat.
But eventually, they were convinced. 6 different people actually piloted the puppet. 4 alone just for the mouth, eyes, and face, and 2 left over for everything else, basically. But it was only in the 3rd season that the Crypt Keeper started appearing in bespoke outfits from pop culture, dressing as Elvis, Uncle Sam, or in one case, Forrest Gump.
Yeah, it's great.
Wow.
He has the little box of chocolates and everything. He's
Oh
so
my God.
cute. I love him.
He's on a bench, I assume?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
They had props. The one the Brad Pitt one, he drives in on a motorcycle. You see his little feet in motorcycle boots.
It is really funny. Yeager said in a making of documentary that there were 27 servo motors inside the Keeper's head alone, and they would burn out every few weeks, so the puppeteers had to keep a close eye on the micro movements of the puppet's face and notice if one area was lagging or breaking down, so the motor didn't actually go up in flames and burn the whole thing down. It's on fire.
Imagine watching that thing and like, oh, he's starting
He's on fire.
He's starting to stroke out. No, get to him, and then it just
The only way
flames.
that damn face could be scarier if it was at the center of a flame.
Yeah.
Wow. The voice of the Crypt Keeper was a guy named John Cassier, previously best known as the voice of the raccoon in Pocahontas. Wait a minute, Pocahontas was made in the 90s, though. It was like 1993.
Oh, I guess not previously. Later, best known?
John Cassier told Observer.com about his audition process, recalling, "I saw some of the other people auditioning were looking at the script copy and saying, 'Oh my God, this stuff is terrible.' They didn't get it. The Crypt Keeper loves saying this stuff. He's delivering it like it's the best Shakespeare. I wanted him to treat the language like it was important, so I gave him a British accent. I used to love Alfred Hitchcock Presents and the way he would introduce those episodes with such a tongue-in-cheek delivery. That is pretty great. What a great way to approach that. That's
They
so
also put it-
wonderful.
In one of the ones we watched last night, they put him in a little Shakespearean ruff.
Like
Because it was the acting episode, and he was like,
Next, I'm doing Shakespeare.
he had his little rough collar. Oh.
Was it cuter or less cute or as cute as Wishbone the dog in the Shakespearean rough collar?
Ooh, great call.
I know.
Less cute, but with a similar charm.
Yeah, yeah. Supposedly, Michael Winslow and Charles Fleischer, the voice of Roger Rabbit, also sent in tapes.
Please, Eddie.
Wait, who's Michael Winslow?
The Police Academy guy. That guy who makes all the weird sounds. He's in Spaceballs. He's like, we've lost the bleeps and the bloops but we got the
Oh yeah, the man of 10,000 sound effects. Yeah. The Keeper's obnoxious laugh was inspired by Margaret Hamilton's Wicked Witch of the West, which caught Yeager's ear when Kassir sent in a tape. Unfortunately, the demands of the voice weighed heavily on Kassir, as you can attest from doing the impression at the top of the episode. He could only track a few minutes at a time and was drinking lemon and honey constantly. He told Digby Deal colorfully that the intensity of the Keeper voice, quote, left his vocal cords like raw meat by the time we were done with the session. He eventually had to modify the voice a little as the show progressed. Also, during the early seasons, he had to slow down his delivery because the puppet couldn't keep up with him, though that eventually picked up as the tech got better.
That's like in Little Shop of Horrors. Rick Moranis, genius that he is, was performing all of his stuff at half speed when he was in scenes with the full Audrey puppet.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, as I mentioned before, or did I? As we alluded to before, we even have TFTC to thank for HBO's famous slogan. The network pitched a reel of its original programming to an ad agency, and when it got to the gratuitous sex and violence portion, someone from the agency said, "It's not TV." And another responded, "No, it's HBO." So from that 20-minute meeting, people made like $500,000, I'm sure, because ad and marketing work is not real.
Oh, way more than that. Way more than that.
Crypt made its debut. Why did I say that? TFTC made its debut in. Why did I say that like that? Tales from the Crypt made its debut in. This is Casey Kasem over here. Tales from the Crypt made its debut in June 1989.
Here's a letter.
I'm working on it. Beating out the networks in HBO's 17 million homes, according to Nielsen figures, with a 24% share of the audience. You thinking about the Bill Maher one?
Yes.
Yeah.
I never want to see you or your boyfriend ever again. I'm Casey Case.
The success of the show was so dramatic and immediate that Universal offered the team a 3-picture deal to be spun off the series. These were also predated, bizarrely enough, by a children's animated TV show, Tales from the Crypt Keeper, which ran on ABC and CBS until 1999.
Oh my God, I forgot.
I think
about
that's
that.
where I might have. I definitely watched episodes of that.
Yeah.
There was also a children's game show called Secrets of the Crypt Keeper's Haunted House that ran for a year on CBS. The first of the feature-length adaptations was Demon Night, which was officially subtitled with the TFTC branding. As a concept, it weirdly enough predates the entire series, and it wasn't adapted from the comics. First draft was written in 1987, and Tom Holland initially wanted to have it be his follow-up to Child's Play. He then made a movie called Fatal Beauty, which bombed at the box office. The script then went to Pumpkinhead screenwriter Mark Carducci, and then a few years later was kicked to Pet Sematary director Mary Lambert. Lambert, bless her, had some radical ideas for it, including casting all African-American leads, but Pet Sematary 2 bombed, so she couldn't get her money to make her vision. Screenwriter Ethan Reif told Fangoria, "This is when we thought this script was cursed." The joke was that the curse wasn't on us, but whoever optioned the script usually had serious career problems afterwards if they didn't make the movie. The script later went to Charles Band's notoriously low-budget but scrappy Full Moon Features. It was optioned as a potential middle picture in the branded trilogy, although neither of the films on either side of it ever got made. The budget problems and headaches surrounding this thing were so pervasive that they didn't know if they were going to have enough money to pull off the eponymous demons. They were just going to have this army of evil just be guys in black suits and sunglasses like the agents in the Matrix. Universal wisely kicked in money for the full treatment, and Ernest Dickerson was tapped to direct. Dickerson had been working primarily as a cinematographer on Spike Lee's early films, but he was coming off his directorial debuts Juice, starring Tupac, great movie, Surviving the Game, starring Ice-T, which is also a great movie, I love in Juice, like Dickerson was a huge fan of the horror genre. Interestingly enough, loved like Lovecraft and everything. And you can see it in Juice, where like Tupac like pops up like Michael Myers in the frame sometimes. Like there's literally scenes in which he does like the Michael Myers face just coming out of the shadows thing. It's so funny. I have to think it was a deliberate tribute because Dickerson knew that much stuff. And he jumped at the chance to play around in the genre. He said that with directorial assignments, sometimes I'd be told, well, we never saw this as a black film. And he said, actually, neither did I. But with Demon Knight, I was able to put some African Americanism into it. For example, I put Jada Pinkett in the role of the heroine. And for me, this was the perfect setup, as until then, if you put a black person in a movie, they would usually be one of the first to die. And she wound up being the final lady. In another interview, I saw him just say that he was happy to make the first film in which a black woman saves the world. Unfortunately, the film did just okay. It made $21 million on a $12 million budget, but that is far from a hit in Hollywood. So after Demon Knight, the Tales from the Crypt Cinematic Universe, TFTCCU, gets a little screwy. The story goes that Quentin Tarantino ended up writing From Dusk Till Dawn, his own screwy movie of the mid-90s, directed by Robert Rodriguez, thanks to Robert Kurtzman. Robert Kurtzman is 1/3 of K&B Effects, who were this legendary practical effects house. His other partners were included Greg Nicotero, who went on to run The Walking Dead for many seasons. And Kurtzman came up for this idea of From Dusk Till Dawn, just to have a project that would be a showcase for what his effects company could do. So in 1990, he hired a young video store clerk named Quentin Tarantino to flesh out a 24-page outline and paid him $1,500 to do so. Kurtzman initially wanted to direct, and so he just couldn't convince anyone to let him do it until after Pulp Fiction, when Tarantino went to Miramax and said, the next movie I do will be From Dusk Till Dawn. In the interim, though, there were talks about it becoming the next Tales from the Crypt movie, and those broke down, which brings us to Bordello of Blood. Bob Zemeckis must have been pissed when From Dusk Till Dawn escaped his clutches, because he'd written a script with Robert Gale right out of film school that was strikingly similar, about a whorehouse full of vampires. They pitched it to John Milius, the insane gun nut libertarian director who wrote Apocalypse Now, directed Conan the Barbarian, and is the inspiration for Walter Sobchak in The Big Lebowski.
I didn't know that. Oh my God.
Milius expressed interest, but the film just didn't get made. But at some point after Tales from the Crypt had done so well, the newly formed DreamWorks Pictures tried to poach Robert Zemeckis from Universal. And he said, no, I'll stay with Universal if I can make Bordello of Blood. This was a mistake. Zemeckis didn't even end up directing it. That chair went to Gilbert Adler, who is a producer in all of those guys' orbits. It was the first and last time he would direct. The thing nearly went down the tubes from the start, thanks to casting. It starred Dennis Miller, who had parlayed his whole shtick on SNL's Weekend Update into Dennis Miller Live. And boy, he sucks. Dennis Miller sucks. He sucks so hard. I hate him. Miller wanted $1 million to make the film, which he had not made before, or I believe after, and Universal wisely refused to pay. So Joel Silver wanted him so much that he cut $750,000 from the FX budget to pay Dennis Miller to be in this movie. Dennis Miller didn't like the dialogue as written and proceeded to improvise much of his lines, which not only screwed over the rest of the cast, but the film's continuity. It was filmed in Vancouver because of Joel Silver's apparently contentious history with Hollywood labor unions. And Vancouver
Sounds right.
Yeah. And Vancouver doesn't have many night hours in July and August, which, as you might surmise, was a hindrance to filming a vampire movie. Because Miller insisted that the film shoot around tapings of Dennis Miller Live, the crew were forced to work weekends, which pissed them off.
There was also the problem of Erica Eleniak, who just come off of Baywatch and was hoping to launch herself as a serious actress. She also demanded rewrites for her character before they'd even gotten onto the set, though she said they were related to Joel Silver attempting to force a girl-on-girl scene between her and Angie Everhart, the other female lead. Everhart, meanwhile, had almost no acting experience, but was dating Sylvester Stallone, who was then starring in The Assassins, produced by Joel Silver. That movie was being shot in Seattle, so yes, Sylvester Stallone basically got his girlfriend cast as a lead in a movie to make visiting her on weekends easier because Seattle and Vancouver are fairly close to one another.
That is such a dick swinging move. I almost have to respect it.
Oh, I totally respect it. Hilariously, in a making of doc, a fresh out of rehab Corey Feldman threw the pair under the bus for acting like divas. The pair meaning Everhart and Erica Leniak.
Elaniak and Miller.
Oh, yeah. Corey Feldman also claimed in his autobiography, the incredibly named Choreography, that Dennis Miller literally told people on air on his TV show not to watch the movie before it even came out. Because, as you correctly noted before, he sucks. In a
He
turn of
sucks so
events,
bad.
yeah. Well, tell me why. Tell me more about why he sucks.
I don't know. His weekend update it was always super weak.
Yeah.
He's like the weakest part of that show. He cannot act for shit. And just he's one of those guys who clearly thought like I'm cool enough to just do me throughout an entire movie. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's the smarm of Miller, and I just associate him with Bill Maher of these like
Yeah.
loser boomers who like came out with their shirt tucked into their dark wash jeans and were like, I don't want to get off on a rant here, but women, like, okay, dude.
This is going to send you into such a... It's sending me into a rage. This just single line from his Wikipedia page. In 1979, after seeing a Robin Williams comedy special on HBO, Miller began to pursue his dream of being a stand-up comedian. He saw Robin Williams, one of the most dynamic, electrifying, colorful performers of the 20th century.
How old was he? Like 25, 30? Like, it must have been like, it's like watching
Yeah.
Michael Jordan sink the shot and being like,
I could do that.
now I must play basketball.
Yeah, he was 26.
Well, it's like M. Night Shyamalan writing The Sixth Sense and looking around at pictures of like posters from like Jaws and Aliens and being
yeah.
I just have to write something as good as those.
But he kind of did.
Oh, fuck off.
You love The Sixth Sense.
I do. Did you see his new one?
No.
What a piece of that movie is. Cut all that out. I don't want to get from the weird M. Night Shyamalan stands that are out there. What a prick. So, the pathetic $5.6 million debut of Bordello of Blood pretty much put the proverbial nail in the coffin of the further big screen adventures of Tales from the Crypt. Though in a sense, we did get another unaffiliated movie out of it. Peter Jackson's The Frighteners, which I think is just an underappreciated little gem from the 90s. Not a lot of people know about this movie. It was completely dominated by Independence Day. But I think it's just a delight.
You might say that not a lot of people know that.
Yes, I might. Peter Jackson and his wife, maybe not at the time, but I think now wife, Fran Walsh, wrote this idea of a psychic who uses real ghosts to fleece people into thinking that their house is haunted and then getting him to cleanse it. They were writing this in 1992 while they were also working on Heavenly Creatures by Peter Jackson. Then they turned The Frighteners into a treatment and sent it off. Robert Zemeckis found it and wanted to make it the next Tales from the Crypt movie. So he hired the two of them to turn their treatment into a full-length screenplay in January of 93, and the pair completed it a year later. This script so impressed Zemeckis that he told Jackson to direct it and that he would produce. Stars Michael J. Fox and a few other interesting people. And it just flopped, man. The marketing was off. As I mentioned earlier, Independence Day was its competition, so that was a fool's errand if ever there was one. But I really like it. You might too, maybe. Probably not.
Yeah, you've said that to me a few times.
Okay.
I mean, anyone who likes the Beatles as much as Peter Jackson does can't be all bad. Here, I got my Beatles reference in there.
There it is.
What killed Tales from the Crypts, though, was, unfortunately, my beloved British. Gilbert Adler told the Daily Dead, I thought if we went to England, it would be great to get all these actors and directors to do Tales from the Crypt. He added that locations were a big deal to him, specifically castles. I couldn't do that in America, he said. In America, if something is 200 years old, it's old. In England, if something is 500 years old, it's young. Also, I wonder if there was a little bit of the Muppets in there, too. Then they shot the Muppet Show in London.
Oh.
I don't know. It's puppets and kind of weird, kitschy, vaudevillian, Borscht Belt stuff at the beginning. I don't know.
I'm listening. Keep pitching.
A Muppets Tales from the Crypt crossover? That has to have happened.
Oh, that
that
would
has
whip.
to have happened.
His piggy like karate chops him.
It must have had like Google that while I finish this. This must have happened.
This may have been a case of Adler's overt Anglophilia before anything else, though.
Yeah, his wife is English. And his first project was produced in London. And at one point, he made a failed bid to bring the Rocky Horror Picture Show over to the U.S. when it was just a theater production in London. Good instincts, good instincts.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not in the case of bringing the Tales from the Crypt over to England. HBO was initially concerned about the cost, but Adler convinced them, and Tales from the Crypt production took over the historic Ealing Studios in West London for 6 months in 1995. That's when problems began almost immediately. Gilbert wasn't able to attract American directors to work in England because of the country's taxes. Even Roger Moore, who's, as you note, as British as they get, told Gilbert from Switzerland, "Call me when you get back to LA. I can't afford to work in London." That's why in the 70s, all those rock stars from England all became tax exiles in LA or Switzerland. Freddie Mercury, Ringo, John Lennon, Keith Moon.
Rolling Stones just took to a yacht.
Yeah. There are also the cultural differences, mainly the mandated twice daily tea breaks and the pub lunch hour each day of shooting. Also, Adler, the director, was completing production on the ill-fated Bordello of Blood while working on the UK season of Tales from the Crypt, which really hung him out to dry. That said, he did end up getting his precious locations, shooting at Nebworth House, Wortham Park, and indeed Dover Castle.
Nebworth House also being where they cut Zeppelin 4, I believe.
No, that was Headley Grange, wasn't it?
Yeah, but why do I have Nebworth in my head?
Because of Nebworth, like the...
Oh, the festival, right.
Yeah.
I was wrong.
There's a chain of chicken places near me called Mad for Chicken, and I always read it in Liam Gallagher's voice. Mad for it. The tone of Tales from the Crypt in England also lightened up, leaning away from its trademark gore and horror to something more British. Or, as you write, something more constipated. Thank you for that. Sorry, John and Lee W. and all our friends over in the UK. Additionally, Bill Gaines died in 1992, the guy who kicked this all off, and the rights to EC reverted back to his family, who simply refused to sell them back to producers to make more Tales from the Crypt episodes. There was an alleged reboot series in the works from... Tell him, Heigl.
M. Night Shyamalan, my favorite, humble, and talented man in Hollywood.
How do you think that would have gone?
Probably dog. He would have been forcing he would have been forcing twists into it. By the way, there is a Muppets Tales from the Crypt connection.
Good.
It is in Muppets Tonight. There was a recurring bit called Tales from the Vet, which was and the intro to that mimicked the tracking shot through the old mansion with passing by a bunch of animals in cages through the vet's office while doing a rip on the Danny Elfman theme.
That's incredible.
But Muppets Tonight was one of the bad ones, right?
I remember liking it. I remember watching it when it first premiered, but I was just so excited the Muppets are coming back.
Came out
like 98, right?
96.
96.
A full order of 22 episodes canceled after broadcasting 10.
Really?
You remembered falsely.
It was that much of a bomb? It was the Muppet Show. What was the difference between Muppets Tonight and the Muppet Show? Wow, I didn't realize people hated it. Did taste just change? Because it was on like Friday night. It was on like the TGIF lineup, wasn't it?
We're so close to finishing this. Don't get bogged down in the details.
All right, take us home.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really was a combination of... It was probably the rights things, because in the limited information I could find about this, they had... In the original contract, it was like up to a amount of time, right? That they had these. And when Bill Gaines died, they couldn't renegotiate it with his estate, who probably realized they got fleeced initially and wanted way more money for it. And
didn't Joel Silver say like we paid very little?
Yeah, and that is currently why you can't watch this thing anywhere unless you they're all on YouTube, which is great. But yeah, they're really dying for like a big authorized Blu-ray treatment or HD remaster regrade. But sad to say,
that is sad.
Yeah, and I don't have much. And you know why that's sad, Jordan, is because the repeated theme that kept coming up in all of my research for this was just how much fun everyone had working on this. It was also sad that the original comics were victim of one of America's seemingly biannual moral panics, but it just rules so hard that all of these people at the top of their respective games came together and created just a working situation, a creative environment that so many people were just completely overjoyed to be a part of. For a few years, at least, Hollywood worked as it was designed to. Talented people got resources to make cool stuff, the working conditions were rewarding, and everyone walked away happy. That doesn't happen that much in any creative field anymore. And that's the truly scary part. But at least we can ghoulishly cackle with joy that it ever happened at all. Folks, thank you all for listening so much. This has been Too Much Information. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. We'll catch you next time.
Too Much Information was a production of iHeart Radio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The show's supervising producer is Michael Alder June.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeart Radio, visit the iHeart Radio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.